I never believed in ghosts, or demons, or anything supernatural really. But looking back, maybe I should have. Maybe if I had taken the warnings seriously, I wouldn't be telling this story now. It all started when I moved into my new apartment in Chicago. The rent was cheap, suspiciously cheap for a place in that part of the city. But I didn't question it. I was 24, broke, and desperate to live alone. The building was old, sure, but I liked its vintage charm. The dark wooden floors creaked when I walked, the pipes groaned late at night, and the air smelled faintly of dust and something I couldn't quite place. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then one night, I heard the tapping. It was a little past 2 a.m. I had just come home from work, exhausted. As I sat on my couch, scrolling through my phone, a soft tap, tap, tap echoed through my apartment. I froze. It was coming from my bedroom window. I live on the 3rd floor. My first thought was that it was a bird, maybe a tree branch swaying in the wind. But there was no tree near my window. Slowly, I stood up, my heart beat loud in my ears. The tapping continued, steady, rhythmic. I pulled back the curtain. There was nothing there. For the next few days, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Maybe I was just too tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But then it happened again. This time I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I felt it, that heavy sensation like I was being watched. My skin prickled and my body froze. Then the tapping started. Slow, deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head toward the window, and my blood ran cold. A man was staring at me. He was outside, pressed against the glass, his face pale and lifeless. His sunken eyes locked onto mine, and his mouth hung open, as if he were gasping for air. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach churn, was that he wasn't moving. He didn't blink. He didn't shift. He just stood there. Then he smiled. I scrambled out of bed, nearly falling in my panic. I flicked on the light, and he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, still shaken, I decided to dig into the history of my building. What I found made my skin crawl. In 1948, a man named Charles Whitmore lived in my apartment. Neighbors described him as quiet, but deeply disturbed. One night, after weeks of erratic behavior, Charles climbed onto the windowsill and stood there for nearly an hour, staring down at the street below. Some witnesses swore they saw him smiling before he finally jumped. The worst part, his body was found 3 floors down, directly beneath my window. I wanted to leave. I wanted to pack my things and never look back. But part of me needed to know if it was real. So that night I stayed awake. I sat on my bed, eyes locked on the window, waiting. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the tapping started. My heart pounded. My hands shook. But I didn't move. I didn't look away. And then he appeared. His face was inches from the glass, his lips curling into that same unnatural smile. But this time, he did something different. He lifted a hand. Slowly, deliberately, he pressed his palm against the window. And I heard it, a whisper. Not from the outside. From inside my room. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but there was no one there. When I turned back to the window, he was gone. I left the next day. I didn't pack everything. I didn't care about getting my deposit back. I just left. But sometimes late at night, I still hear tapping at my window. And I wonder if he ever really left. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw him. His profile picture had been normal, attractive even. Clean cut, warm smile, dark eyes. But the man sitting across from me at the restaurant, something about him felt off. It wasn't his appearance. He looked just like his pictures. It was something else. The way he barely blinked. The way he tilted his head slightly when I spoke, as if analyzing every word. But I ignored it. I had been single for too long. My friends pushed me to try dating apps, and after weeks of hesitation, I finally agreed to this blind date. Give people a chance, they had said. So I did. At first, the conversation was normal. He asked about my job, my family. But after a while, I noticed something strange. He wasn't eating. His plate was full. The candlelight flickered against the untouched steak, the edges of the meat turning dry. "You're not hungry?" I asked, forcing a laugh. He smiled. "I just like watching you." The way he said it, it didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a warning. I tried to change the subject. "So tell me something interesting about yourself." He leaned in. The candlelight made his eyes gleam unnaturally. "Do you believe in fate?" I hesitated. "I guess." His smile widened. I've met you before. I let out a nervous chuckle. I don't think so. Oh, I know so, he whispered. I've watched you sleep. My body went cold. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. That's not funny. His face didn't change. I saw you on the train last month. You didn't see me, but I was there. I followed you home. You left your curtains open. You really should be more careful. The room around me seemed to blur. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. You're lying, I whispered. I never lie. He reached into his pocket. I tensed, ready to run. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a photo. It was a picture of me, sleeping. My bedroom. My bed. My face turned slightly toward the window. And standing outside, in the dark, was him. I shot up from my seat, knocking over my glass. Water spilled across the table, but I didn't care. My only thought was run. His expression never changed. He just watched, like he was waiting. I turned and rushed toward the exit. The restaurant was full, people laughing, eating, completely unaware that something was horribly wrong. As I stepped outside, my heart pounding, I reached for my phone to call the police. But then, my screen lit up with a notification. A message. Unknown number. Leaving so soon? I thought we were just getting started. And then another. Unknown number. You forgot to lock your back door again. When my grandparents passed away, I inherited their old house deep in the countryside. It was a wooden house, isolated, surrounded by dense forest. A place forgotten by time. In the backyard, there was a well. Ancient, made of cracked stone, covered in moss. My grandfather always said the well was cursed, that no one should go near it. I thought it was just an old man's superstition. Until the night I heard the voice. I woke up to a strange noise. A whisper, faint but clear. I assumed it was the wind. But as I listened closer, I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the well. A soft, trembling voice. Please help me. My body froze. Someone was down there. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped out into the cold night. The wind howled, but the voice continued. Help me. I've been trapped for so long. I leaned over the well's edge, shining the light inside. Nothing. Just darkness. But then, something moved. A pale shape. Faint. Flickering. And two white, pupilless eyes stared back at me. I ran inside and locked the doors, my heart pounding. The next morning, I went to town and asked the locals about the well. An elderly woman's face turned pale. The last girl who fell in there was never found. What do you mean? I asked, a lump forming in my throat. Your grandfather tried to save her, but they never found a body. Some say the well never let her go. That night, the voice returned. But this time it was closer. I lay in bed, paralyzed, as the whispering moved inside my room. The air grew colder. My breath turned to mist. Then I felt it. A presence behind me. Slowly, I turned my head and saw rotting, bony hands emerging from the wall. A decayed mouth whispered against my ear. Now you're trapped too. My friends and I decided to go camping deep in the wilderness. We wanted adventure, but we got lost. And when we found an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere, we realized we were not alone. The first night was eerie. In the dead of night, I heard footsteps. Slow, dragging, coming from outside the cabin. We shone our flashlights through the window. Nothing. But the moment we turned them off, the footsteps started again. By morning, we found footprints surrounding the cabin. But something was wrong. The footprints were human, but the toes were too long. We thought about leaving, but the trail had changed. The trees weren't the same anymore. On the second day, one of our friends disappeared. He had gone to collect firewood. He never came back. We called his name until sunset. Then we heard his voice, but it didn't sound right. It was his tone, but wrong. As if something was imitating him. Leave, the voice whispered. But the forest wouldn't let us. On the third night, the woods whispered. Leaves rustled without wind. A low hum filled the air. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to my remaining friends and realized they weren't blinking anymore. Their eyes were too wide, too empty. That's when I knew. My friends were no longer my friends, and I was the only one left to be taken. When I moved into my new apartment, I quickly noticed something strange. The unit next to mine, 609, was always locked. No one ever seemed to come or go. But every night I heard something. A wet, squelching sound. Like someone was chewing raw meat. One day, my neighbor from 609 knocked on my door. She was thin, pale, with sunken eyes. "Would you like to join me for dinner?" she asked, smiling. I hesitated, but accepted out of politeness. But when I sat at her table, I noticed something horrifying. The meat on my plate was moving. I tried to refuse, but she insisted. Her smile never faltered. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A door slightly ajar. Inside, something was watching me. A swollen, bruised face. Its lips trembled as it tried to speak. I was about to scream when the face disappeared into the darkness. The woman's voice cut through the silence. "Eat, or I'll have to get more fresh meat." I made an excuse to leave. My hands were shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. The noises from 609 grew louder. Slurping, gnawing, sucking sounds. I put my ear to the wall, and then I heard it. A whisper barely audible. "Help me before she eats the rest of me." I ran out of my apartment and never looked back. The next day, the police broke into 609. But the unit was empty. No furniture. No dishes. No signs of anyone ever living there. Only a rotting smell lingering in the air. And a single bloody tooth, lying in the middle of the floor.